Welcome everyone to June's gsLive. I'm Claudia Reich, Senior Director of Adult Development. And with me tonight is Diane Nelson, CEO of Girl Scouts of Eastern Iowa and Western Illinois. And our special guest for this evening is Jen Cobb. She's a licensed mental health counselor at Vera French. Jen will be speaking on the social emotional impact of the pandemic, both for youth and parent perspective. And I'll give you a little more background on her later. But let's go on to the next slide here, if I can do it. All right. The first thing we're going to do tonight is to have a little poll. We've been switching this up this year, trying to find that sweet spot that everybody would like. We're talking about starting in August, changing it to Tuesday evening rather than Wednesday to see if that might help. But as you can see, there's some time changes that we want to see. What's the best time? It used to be noon time on before, and may still be what you prefer. But I am going to launch the poll, and if you have a problem seeing it, you can always write your answer in the chat log, and we'll go from there. We're getting some responses. All right, we got a few more to go. Oh, we're almost there, 91%. I think I have my answer. All right, I'm going to close it. I think we're pretty close here. And I will share my screen and let you know the results. I think it's a kind of an overwhelming 6 p.m. So that's good to know. I thank you very much for participating, and we'll go back to our next slide. I just wanted you to be aware, I don't know if you've seen the advertisements on Facebook or not, but GSUSA is hosting this Saturday, the 27th, the Girl Scouts Run the World. And it's this exclusive virtual Girl Scout party to celebrate all that we've been through this year. There'll be a girl group, a newly formed girl group. They're called Run the World. So I don't know, they're going by RTW, it sounds like. And there's DJs, and there'll be product giveaways. And it's for the girls, and of course, adults as well. So, spread the word. I put the link there, and I'm also going to try my very best. I don't know if I can do it or not, but I was going to try to get the link over to the chat room, and I will try a little bit later to do that. But if it doesn't work, I'm going to send it out to you in an email afterwards, just so that you have the links to get on there. And I have another link later on that I'll give you as well. So that is that. And I am so happy to welcome Jen Cobb to our session tonight. We have been having visual difficulties getting Jen on the screen, but her words are the important part of her presentation, so we're going to go with that. Jen has been working in the mental health field for 14 years and has been working at Vera French for the past 4 years, providing therapy services to youth clients, managing the school-based therapy program, overseeing grief and loss services for youth at Rick's House of Hope, and assisting with the multi-systemic therapy team. Jen is also a mother of 4 children, ages 6 and under. So she says she has no hobbies, but she does use her perspective as an adoptive and biological mother to enhance her work with parents. She has a strong passion for promoting youth social and emotional well-being in the community and connecting with agencies and families. I'm going to turn my volume off and my camera off. And Jen, I turn it over to you.
All right, well, thank you for that lovely introduction. Can you hear me, Claudia? Just want to make sure everyone can hear me right now. I apologize for no one being able to actually see me at this point because I think, you know, that definitely enhances whenever you are listening to a speaker, being able to kind of see their nonverbals as a therapist. That's super important. So, you know, I apologize you're missing out on that this evening. But Claudia and I were talking on the phone the other day, and one of the things that we were just sort of having really good dialogue about was, you know, this pandemic obviously has really altered everyone's world. And then on top of that, we, you know, we're rolling sort of out of that and trying to transition back to some sense of normalcy, and kind of smack on top of the back of that, we ended up with this social and racial unrest that has also kind of added another layer of stress for our adults, but also the youth in our community. And how do people navigate that, and what's that going to look like, and how are our kids going to fare, you know, coming out of this? And right now it's kind of interesting because we're kind of done talking about the social isolation piece, because at this point, our state in particular, and even Illinois that's close to us, is starting to kind of come out of that, and we're kind of re-emerging into the community. But what does that look like, and how does that affect our kids? So kind of one of the things we were talking about with the social isolation was, what we really noticed is that was much more difficult for our older kids, our preteens and teens. And predominantly the reason why that was so difficult for them, you know, stopping school so abruptly, stopping all their social interactions, was because teenagers have this tendency of, they shift their attachment to their peer group. So their primary attachment to their caregivers doesn't go away. It's still there, and it's still a really positive, wonderful buffer system. But they shift that attention to their peers, and that peer group is very important for their development and their feeling of connection and their feeling of joy and happiness and fulfillment. And so when you take that away, what that does is that leaves wide open this sort of zone where if there's any feelings of fear, any feelings of anger, any feelings of, you know, just worry or sadness, there you kind of remove that buffer that those peers provide for our teens and preteens. And so what we noticed was our teens really struggled the most with things like stress. You know, they were talking about having more worries and more fear, being a little bit more sad. They were also removed from a lot of their activities. So, you know, for most of our kids, I think you guys would all know, with Girl Scouts, we push them and say, you need to join some activities. Pro-social activities are so great for you for, you know, staying out of trouble, you know, having those peer connections. And when we kind of took a lot of that away, that at least that in-person activity where they could see each other and interact, a lot of our youth really struggled with that. Now what's happening is we're re-emerging. A lot of these youth are starting to see their friends again. They're out and about, but there's sort of this sense of, is it safe, and is it okay? And, you know, some people are wearing masks and some aren't, and how does that affect everybody? And not all youth are being treated equal, right, by their parents. So kind of pre-pandemic, you have parenting styles ranging from, you know, really high demand, you know, rigid kind of rule setting, down to very permissive, allowing a lot. And during the pandemic, parenting styles kind of shifted. And so like even in my house, we're kind of a routine, follow, you know, a pretty predictable schedule, but some of that went out of the window, you know, which is confusing to kids because we, you know, my husband and I were very stressed. We were working longer hours. We were dealing with the stress at work with our own staff and, you know, the trauma in our, you know, community. And so we kind of laxed a little and said, we need less structure in the evenings so that we can breathe and sort of decompress. But now we're kind of re-emerging into, all right, we got to get back into reading books every night. We're not going to play outside until, you know, 8:30, 9 o'clock. We need to kind of have a set bedtime again. And all of that's really confusing to kids. And as they are re-emerging, some adults are feeling less concerned about the pandemic at this point and are saying, you know, it's totally fine for you to go over to your friend's house and have a sleepover. While there might be other parents that may have been more permissive prior to the pandemic, but maybe they have an autoimmune disorder, or maybe there's somebody in the home that they're worried about their health. So now they're kind of having more rules and saying, nope, I'm sorry, we can't allow you to do that. You know, that's putting somebody in our house at risk. So it's creating a lot of confusion for kids just from the parenting side and how we're handling it emotionally, but also how we're handling it from the parenting style piece, because that's all been sort of wonky and kind of thrown out the window as well for a lot of parents. So, and how do we help our kids sort of understand this and feel fair? It's fair, right? Because kids, that word fair and equal is so critical to them, right? Like they're always like, she got more than I did, or you know, his piece is bigger than mine. They really are so focused on fairness. And so when things don't feel fair to them, you know, that causes a lot of turmoil and a lot of tension, on top of having all that added time with your family with the loss of breaks. You know, it just creates more stress. So what do we do on our way out of this? You know, how do we talk to our kids about, you know, reemerging and the possibility of down the road there being another spike and then possibly having to socially isolate again? Well, I think, you know, the way that we best handle this is, you know, first of all, talking honestly with our kids. You know, I think they'll catch you in those little white lies, you know, that we think are trying to protect them, but we have to be pretty honest with them about what is happening, obviously taking into consideration developmental levels, right? So with younger kids, we have to be careful how honest, you know, with our own emotions and fears and thoughts. But I think, you know, being very clear about, yes, you know, this virus can make people very sick. But then focus on the good pieces. But if you wash your hands and you wear your mask and you take your precautions and you do all these things, that is very helpful, you know, and that will help keep you safe. And really focus on what they can do proactively to not get the virus versus sort of focusing on, you know, how dangerous it is. But I think being very clear that it is, you know, causing some people to get very sick. The other part is really answering those questions for those older youth, and this may even come up as volunteers and staff, because you'll have children that don't have that support system at home where they feel comfortable having these kinds of conversations or dialogue. So I think, you know, the first thing I always do is I just ask some questions, you know, about what they've seen, what they've heard, how do they feel about what that newscast was talking about or reporting on, what were their takeaways from it, you know, did that cause any fear and anxiety? And then being able to be sort of that reassuring person that is able to take some of that media information and help remind them of, again, the positives. And this goes along too with that social unrest. You know, there is a lot of negative images out there right now. And there's a lot of focus on the things that people are doing that aren't okay versus the things that people are doing that are really awesome and wonderful and positive in our communities. And so I think trying to help shift them a little bit into that too, like, yes, there's some people rioting, and yes, there's some people that are being kind of naughty, right? But there are also some people doing amazing things. Like, look at this activist over here and the work they're doing, and look at all these people peacefully protesting, and look at the people that are supporting through this method, and the people that are supporting the police, and the people that are supporting the Black Lives Movement. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can kind of retailer that and structure it so they can see the positive side of what's happening as well, because there tends to be a lot of emphasis on the shock factor and the things that kind of get our attention. And it takes away some of our kids' ability to see the big picture and what's really happening in our communities, when there's a lot of focus on the few things that are not always so positive. The other part is to validate feelings. So our children all the time, are telling us how they feel about things. And sometimes as adults, we have a tendency to try to kind of, we're not judging that, but we try to say, I don't know if that, that's how you should feel about that. We try to redirect them. But I think what we have to focus on is validating that their feeling is their feeling. And we can change some of their faulty beliefs maybe, but the way they feel about something is valid, right? So it might make them angry to see something, that they've seen in the community or on the news or that they've heard about. And although we might want them to react a different way or feel differently about that, we have to remember that it's okay for them to feel angry about it. However, we need to, redirect that anger into positive behaviors. What can you do if you're feeling like, really stuck with what's happening right now? How can you help make this positive? The other thing is, I think we really have to promote our youth staying in touch with family and friends right now, really finding those support systems, whoever that might be. And that might be kinship, it might be a teacher that, is a really supportive person to that youth, trying to find ways for them to connect to that person. If they have an uncle that has always been there for them, making sure that they're getting some time to FaceTime if they can't see each other in person, and finding ways like reminding them that you can always write somebody a letter. I know that's a pastime and I'm dating myself with that, but these are really awesome ways that people can connect with each other and kind of keep those connections that are so important for our livelihood intact. And then, I think one of the most important things that we as adults can do is really model positive ways to manage our emotions too. So we are human and we are going to have really, pretty significant feelings about the things that are happening in our community. I think, one of the things that a lot of people have been talking about is our school is going to go back in the fall. And there's, so many mindsets on what that should look like, and if people are going to be happy with the decision that's made. If we don't go back, people are going to be mad. If we go back a hybrid model, people are going to be mad. If we go back fully, people are going to be mad. It's like you can't win. But modeling appropriate ways to kind of manage your own feelings about whatever decisions are being made, whether that's political, whether that's a community-based, whether that's something at work. If we set that tone for kids that, this is frustrating for me, but I'm not going to, rant about it in front of my children. I'm just going to let them know, I'm really frustrated by that decision. But, obviously it's sort of something that's out of my circle of control. So I'm going to try my best to cope with that and realize that this is something that I'm just going to have to roll with. Because, again, our kids take their cues from us. And if our emotions are very dysregulated, it is very hard for them to feel regulated in our presence. And that goes for, parents, that goes for staff and volunteers and adults who work with kids. We have to kind of always be modeling that really good emotion regulation ability. The other thing is, we need, when kids are stressed out and when we're stressed out even, we need to provide more nurture, more opportunities for hugs, more opportunities for just reassuring them and letting them know that things are going to be okay. We don't know what to expect, but it's going to be all right. And then, as I talked about before, keeping those healthy routines. And I always say, do as I say, not as I do as a therapist, because I break all of my rules that I tell parents when I'm doing parenting, sessions. but, keep those healthy routines. It is really important for kids to have some of that normalcy and predictability. And we're no different as adults. I think we learned that in the pandemic. A lot of folks that had to work from home, or all of a sudden weren't working, or all of a sudden were becoming a stay-at-home mom teacher or dad, I think what we realized is our routines got thrown off, and that was really difficult for us to adjust to. Now, kids need it even more than we do, though, because we kind of get, okay, my routine's off, this is why I'm a little off. Kids don't really understand that. That's really hard for them. So, those healthy routines, having a bedtime, and, it doesn't have to be as strict, right? But there still needs to be some semblance of like, we got to get our sleep. Sleep is good for our health. It's when we, our body repairs itself and allows us to feel energized for the next day. Some routine with meals. We're going to eat, lunch every day. We're not going to skip lunch just because, we don't have anything else to do. And then, the snacking, that one's a hard one when your kids are at home all the time because they just want to snack all day. Or even if they come to an activity that you guys are throwing, that's another one. They just really want to snack because they love snacking. And then, I think the other part is limiting that media time and the tech time and the exposure to some of those things that really aren't healthy for brain development. And really, I know there was a lot of focus on tech time during this pandemic because everything went to virtual, which is then really hard to say you can't have your tech time, but you need to get on your Zoom call for, your meeting with your teacher, or you're going to have a virtual meeting with Girl Scouts, right? And so we can only limit it so much, but I think right now we have to be more mindful of that because there is so much more use of virtual platforms at this point that we have to kind of take that into consideration with our kids, that I think they're burning out on it a little bit, just as we are. I think you watch in meetings, everybody's got their camera off now, and I didn't do that intentionally, but they people are just kind of over the whole having to be on virtual platforms. And I think kids are kind of rolling with that as well. So just being mindful of some of that for kids as we're rolling out of this pandemic and kind of dealing with the social unrest. The media time, I think, is really important as well, because again, as I talked about before, there's just a lot of negative, images and reporting for that sensationalization piece. And we just want to try to keep our kids from having so much access to that, because it is one of those things, like when we remember back to 9/11, everybody just kind of sat and watched and watched and watched and watched and watched, the towers get hit over and over again. And what that does is that actually, can cause kind of a secondary trauma response in your brain, watching something that is traumatic, all the time. And some of the things that have been happening, in our communities, can be very traumatic to watch, and especially if you're having so much exposure to them, that can be really difficult for kids. So kind of part of that as well, I think, one of the ways that I've been talking about talking to the younger kids as they reemerge, there's a lot more confusion for them about the masks and safety, and if they can play with their friends and if they can't play with their friends, and what that means, and if they're safe. So there, I didn't make this up, so I'm not as brilliant as I would like to say, but I heard this analogy, and it was really a really good one, and I felt like it was one that is worth sharing. And it's about a swimming pool, and this is really a good analogy for little kids, because sometimes they have a hard time with complex ideas that adults have. And so it's the swimming pool, and you talk about how there are, just a massive amount of people in this swimming pool. It's super crowded, and there are people that have on floaties and people that have on their life jackets, and those people are safe, right? That they're going to be okay, and they're not going to have any problem with drowning because they've got protection. And then you have a bunch of other people in the pool that don't have, the floaties or the life vests, and they are not as safe because they don't know how to swim, and they don't have a safety device to help them. And in this instance, there's only 2 lifeguards, and they're trying to watch this entire pool of people and keep everybody safe. And so kind of the situation with the social isolation is that we've asked all the people that are already safe to get out of the pool. So all the people with the life vests and their floaties on, they need to get out of that pool so that the lifeguards can focus in on the people that aren't safe and make sure that they can get to them and help them and take care of them. If for some reason they do get sick or they have a problem in the pool, they can get to them. And then you can talk to them a little bit about how like the lifeguards are the doctors and there's not enough doctors for everybody. So we have to make sure we stay out of the pool and help, the doctors to be able to see, who needs the help and make sure they can get to those people right away. So I found that to be a very interesting one. And I think that kind of analogy will be really important as we reemerge, just reminding our kids, although we're coming out and they're saying it's kind of okay to do some of the things we haven't been doing, we still have to remember that there's some people out that aren't as safe as we are. They aren't as healthy as we are. So we have to do some things like continue to wash our hands, continue to, try to have some social distancing. If you are, feeling like masks are important, promoting that as well. You need to be wearing your masks, which are the safest thing. And just kind of reminding them of why we're continuing to do some of these things to help other people stay safe. It's not for us so much as other people. And I just thought that was a really great analogy because I think little kids can kind of understand that, like, they don't want to leave the pool, right? Nobody ever wants to get out of the pool. And so like staying at home also kind of stinks when you're a kid. You don't want to be staying at home and not enjoying life. But that there's a really good reason for it to keep the other people safe. So one of the other things I've kind of talked about, and this is, I think, probably really important for staff and individuals who are working with kids right now, and even parents, is kind of, we need to just lower our expectations of our kids right now. I think we need to lower our own expectations for ourselves and realize that, some of our emotions probably aren't in check and that we're dealing with everything else that's happening as well. But then remembering that our kids are going to not be totally perfect angels right now, and they're going to be kind of struggling and having their own challenges with, their own emotions and regulating those behaviors, because this is difficult. Their routines are off. They're not around their friends. They haven't been in school. They might not be getting meals as much as they need and getting enough sleep. So just kind of lowering those expectations of what their typical behavior, kind of looks like, and then allowing for some of that variability for them. And then, as we talk about the social unrest, I think, that's a kind of interesting topic because it's kind of died down a little bit in our community, I think, because there's the feeling of safety that just because there's not any rioting, this is sort of not something that we're predominantly dealing with as much in our community. But the reality is our nation is dealing with it, and there's kind of this underlying, movement happening, and people are not feeling good. And I think, if you're working with children who race is, their background is they're white, and I think part of what our job as adults is not to change a child's belief system. That is something that, in therapy, people come in with some faulty beliefs. But if they don't want to change their belief because they don't feel like it's hurting them in any way, you're not going to be able to help them change that belief. So sometimes our kids come in with this belief system that has probably been, implemented through their environment, either caregivers or just sort of their community. And, our job is not necessarily to say like that belief is wrong or you shouldn't feel that way or say those things. I think our job as adults is to just try to remember the impact that those belief systems have, and kind of helping kids see that, like, when you act like that towards other people, does that serve you well? Does that get you good reactions? Do you think that makes, people want to be your friend and be around you? Just kind of trying to open up their eyes a little bit to how their beliefs are creating kind of an outcome for them. But again, if they don't want to change their beliefs, a lot of the things that we're going to say aren't going to do any good. And you see this all over social media. You'll have best friends that are fighting, on social media, and you're like, nobody's going to win this, because really neither person wants to change their belief system. It's serving them well. And so, it doesn't really matter what amazing argument the person on the other side has for, you should really feel this way. if that person doesn't have any intent on changing, they're probably not going to. And we as people that work with youth, we have to be very careful that we don't step on, caregiver toes, because sometimes children's belief systems, come from those caregivers, and we don't want those caregivers to remove them from that activity because they feel like the adults or staff in that center or place are trying to kind of change their kid. And again, kids, if their caregiver has this belief system, they're going to feel really strongly tied to that too, and they're going to feel kind of defensive if you try to approach that and change their mind as well, because it can make them feel a little bit like they need to defend the way their parents behave, and feel. And so again, it's just a tricky thing, but I think, it's hard to kind of ignore, but also it's one of those things you have to kind of be tender about, because you have to realize that those beliefs are, are sometimes core and central to that family unit. And then on the flip side of that, we're most likely you guys are going to be working with children of color, and right now with the social unrest, we're predominantly kind of looking at Black youth and their feelings. And I think for that, it's just having that open dialogue, like being that person that they can talk to if, they're having some big feelings like fear or anger or confusion or frustration, or sadness or disappointment, and allowing, that child to have that dialogue and have somebody that can support them through that, that doesn't try to judge or again change any of those belief systems, but just allow those feelings to be their feelings. Because again, there's a lot of history to some of these belief systems, and again, those are coming from the system, right? They're coming from their parents, they're coming from caregivers, their community, and so really supporting that and feeling like you can allow that youth to have that open dialogue, I think is really important. And again, focusing on fairness when you're talking to kids about this topic, because again, kids love fairness and things to be equal. So when you see something happening, saying, do you think that that's fair, that child was treated that way, and other kids don't get treated that way? Because I think kids can see that better when they feel like there's an equity and balance. They're able to kind of go, oh yeah, that's not fair. People should really treat them different than that. That's not okay, or that's not very nice. But again, that's a difficult thing to try to change people's belief systems. But I think if you can kind of go at that approach of fairness, sometimes you can get kids to kind of see that it's not equitable. And anyways, that's kind of my spiel for this evening. I know I've talked pretty long, and I can't really see anybody, so I don't know if anybody has any reactions or anything. But I wanted to make sure I left some time if anybody has questions or dialogue, or just had any comments they wanted to make, that I allowed for some time for that.
If you want to raise your hand, we can unmute you, and then you can ask a question. We'll just say a couple of questions, and then we'll have to move on. I'm going to kind of watch and see if anybody is raising their hand here. Thanks, Jen, for coming tonight and
You're very welcome.
giving some great information for us. I don't see anybody has their hand raised. I don't see anything in the chat log. I'll give it another minute here. Nope, I don't see anything.
Well, I really appreciate the time, and again, I'm sorry that you didn't get to be able to kind of follow along viewing me, but I appreciate just your openness to kind of hearing about some of this and learning a little bit more about how we can navigate this time with youth.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
And if any questions come in later, feel free to email me. I don't have any problem answering some questions after the fact.
Yep. Somebody asked about your email, so I will certainly get that to them.
Okay.
All right. Diane, we're going to let you turn it over. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. That was very, very interesting. And I apologize, but for some reason, my screen is not working either. And I know you all really want to look at me. So Claudia, I don't know why it's not, but we'll give it a try. So anyway, I think you guys all know my voice. So thank you so much, Jen. That was just very, very informative. It was just so nice to hear about how our youth are handling this situation. You made some really good points that I think are right in line with things we're doing in Girl Scouts, creating those peer groups for our girls that make them feel joy and fulfillment. We know that so many of them are going through this stress and worries and sad. This is such a hard time for our girls, and I think that's why staying in touch, as you said, with our families and our friends are just so important. So it was a very, very good information, and so appreciate everything that you said. I think one of the things that was really cool and really right on schedule is also the healthy routines for our kids and how we have to have that healthy routine. And I think that's what Girl Scout troops are all about, is that routine, that they feel like they're in a safe environment. So it's really important that we continue to provide our programs for our girls. So thank you, leaders, for making that happen. So Claudia, I just want to know if you can still hear me. Well, I am going to assume
It's kind of choppy, but keep going.
you can hear me. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you now.
Okay. So I'm not sure what's going on, but that's just technology. We just gotta deal with it. So couple things that I wanted to have a conversation with all of you about. Lots of things going on in our Girl Scout Council, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. But I just really want to express my appreciation to all of you, all of our volunteers and Girl Scouts. Throughout my time here in the Girl Scouts, we've been through a lot. And I know many of you have been through it with us, but this COVID-19 pandemic has certainly tested us like never before. But thank you for keeping our girls engaged and keeping our girls safe. So let me tell you a few things that are happening. We are making some decisions in our Girl Scout Council that have been somewhat difficult, and some things that are kind of great in moving us forward. And I just want to also say thank you to all of our volunteers. We had so many committees that we were able to throw our ideas and look at things differently, and we got volunteers step up and give us their thoughts and ideas. And I'm telling you, that's what helps us moving forward, is when we partner with our volunteers. So thank you to all of our volunteers that had part of this conversation as we move forward. So as of July 5th through September 26th, our staff, our team members are going to be reducing their hours at work. I don't think that should be a huge surprise. I'm so thankful that we don't have to have a lot of layoffs or furloughs, but we are reducing the majority of our staff, our full-time employees, to 32 hours a week. And we will not be open on Fridays in our Girl Scout offices. So we'll keep you posted on that as we move forward. Even with this new schedule, I know our team is still going to be working hard to continue to serve all of our members. So we've had a great conversation with our staff. They understand it. And we're just going to continue doing everything we can to support our volunteers and our girls. We're doing a few different things with property as well. Some of you are very familiar with this, I know, but we are moving our Dubuque office. We're moving it out to Camp Little Cloud. So that's kind of exciting news. Our team's very excited to have such a beautiful setting to work from. And we'll be welcoming all of our members to come out and see our new way of work, and they'll have a chance to see Camp Little Cloud. Our programs will continue at Camp Little Cloud once we open camp back up. And shop supplies can be ordered online, and they can be also curbside. So our shop team will hold pop-up shops all over the Dubuque community. So we'll not have our regular store in Dubuque, but we're going to meet our volunteers' needs by continuing to have online sales, curbside pickups, and then just make sure that we have the store available when needed for activities and events that are happening in our Dubuque community. As you know, Camp Liberty will be welcoming Girl Scouts soon, I hope. It's been a tough summer, not being able to have resident camp, but we're hoping to be able to do some family programs later on in July. So please connect to our website to get the latest updates. And our Girl Scout office in Bettendorf will continue having the regular shop hours except for Fridays. And we will continue having our curbside pickup options as well. We are going to be working on a plan to have appointments, so you can call in and have an appointment to come in to our stores, hopefully in late July and early August. Again, a lot of that information will be on our website as we move forward, and I'm sure all of you know every day is a different day and can be very challenging. So we're just going to try to keep on top of this as much as we can. So just stay connected to our website. And then the other thing that we decided to do moving forward is we are going to sell our program center in Rock Island. We've had some great conversations with our volunteers. It used to be our Girl Scout office, and then we turned it into a program center, and it was a site for program usage for our members, but it was really declining, and our members were not using it at the level that we were hoping. We think a lot of them are meeting now more with their schools and with the community sites, and some of them are actually going out to Camp Liberty. So our property committee has made the decision to sell our program center in Rock Island, but that does not mean we're still not going to have program opportunities. We're just going to have a different location. Also, our team is continuing to search for a new location in our corridor. By 2021, we want to find a site in our Cedar Rapids office with more space for a program, better parking, more community visibility. And these are kind of feedback we've received from our volunteers that we need to make a few changes in our Cedar Rapids office. We'll still continue to have our regular shop hours, but we'll also provide curbside pickup and continuing with online. So we'll be in our Cedar Rapids office until the end of this year, and then we are in the process of looking for a new location that just better serves our volunteers. And then in our West Burlington and our Waterloo office, our council officers will continue to work at the same office location, but we're going to also have new opportunities for our shop at each one of those offices as well. We are going to hold regular pop-up shops, curbside pickup, and continue to encourage people to order online. Those shops will not be located in those office buildings anymore because we're trying to meet the needs of our volunteers with trying to change our way of giving our volunteers a place to shop is more like pop-up, curbside pickup, so on and so forth. So those are some big changes that we're having with our office locations. And then, as you know, our 3 camps are all closed for the summer, unfortunately. But hopefully we'll be able to provide some family activities later on this summer. So again, like I said earlier, just get on our website to continue to see If this COVID starts to turn around, we're going to do everything we can to provide some family activities out at camp. But we have some challenges, as you know, but we're going to do the best we can because we really want to see people out at our camp. So Camp Liberty and Camp Little Cloud, as soon as we're able, we're going to be opening those camps up. And Camp Alquita in Burlington will be opened in spring. So those are a lot of things that are happening with our camp programs. And again, just get on info at girlscoutstoday.org. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them. So those are some things that are happening with our properties and some changes that we are making because we just think it'll better serve our volunteers, our girls, and our community. And some other really fun things that are happening is that obviously as leaders and service unit directors, you know it's renewal time. And if you were on gsLive last month, you heard me talk a lot about how important the renewal will be this year because the fall is so unpredictable. We just do not know what's going to be happening this fall. So we have to work extremely hard to get our girls to renew this year so we can provide these quality opportunities for them during the summer and be prepared to continue our Girl Scout program in the fall, even if we're not able to get into some of the schools. So today we have over 4,200 girls that have already committed for next year, which is more than we had last year. So it's been a fantastic opportunity. We have over 36 service units that have stepped up and said, let's go, let's get these girls renewed. So thank you to every one of those 36 service units that have already made their renewal goal. And I really have a feeling that every one of our service units are going to make the renewal goal because they understand how important it is that we get our girls renewed now because of the unpredictability in the fall. So there's some great work happening. And just remember, there are free t-shirts for all of our girls. You know, we talked to some volunteers, we talked to girls. They're extremely excited about the free t-shirts. So we have until July 15th. So if you're on this call and you're a service unit director or you're a leader, please get your girls re-registered. The t-shirts are a great opportunity for our girls. And your girls will get a 1-year virtual program for every age level every month in 2021, which is pretty cool. And they're free. The virtual programs will be free for every girl who re-registers now. So if you do the renewal now, we have the t-shirt incentive and they have the opportunity to have these virtual programs. So just think about that. If you're a troop leader and you meet twice a month as a troop, one of these meetings are already planned for you, these virtual programs. And we have had a lot of success with our virtual programs that we've done thus far in Eastern Iowa and Western Illinois, and we've had amazing feedback. So it makes 100% sense that we take the time to get our girls renewed. So please help out our council and make sure that our girls join Girl Scouts now so we can have a quality program this fall. And then just the last thing I just wanted to touch base on a little bit is some of the things that Jen was talking about earlier when it comes to this whole racial justice and the things that we've been dealing with in our community. Diversity, equality, inclusion is something that Girl Scouts has always had in their programs, but we are going to continue to really take a deep dive to make sure every girl knows that she has an opportunity to be part of this program. And it's just really important. We've been working a lot with GSUSA to make sure that our girls understand everything possible when it comes to diversity and equality and inclusion. Claudia is going to put in our chat room some information from GSUSA because our Girl Scouts are taking a stand against racism. and we're making pledges. We're going to work to provide social justice for all of our girls. We're going to do everything we can to make sure our girls understand the importance of inclusion and ensuring that all of our girls have an opportunity to be part of our Girl Scout program. So we encourage you to read and to make the pledge yourself when you see it on the chat, in the chat area. Please click on that website, read all the information that GSUSA is saying, and continue to support our girls in all walks of life. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Claudia to kind of wrap us up with the door prize. And again, I apologize for the technology difficulties we've had. I'm not sure what's been going on, so I apologize for that. But every month we try to get better and better. So with that, Claudia, it's all yours.
All right, thank you, Diana. I'm also having technical difficulties getting those links into the chat room, so I'm going to send a follow-up email to all of you in the morning, and I'll have the links all ready for you. And any questions that you may have had, I'll try to get those answered as well. I do want to have some door prizes, so I am going to pick some names here. Give me a second. And I'm going to get on the screen so you can see the first one is this beautiful scarf, Girl Scout scarf. And that is going to go to, drum roll, Stacy Rye. Is that how you say your last name, Stacy? W-R-A-Y. I always just call you Stacy. But congratulations. I will get that out to you. And we have one more thing to show you and to give out tonight. And I just thought these were the cutest little things. They're little tags for your the adult uniform that you have, or that you can purchase and make it look so cool. So these are little tags that say troop leader, and the other one says service unit team, but you can have, there's a couple other ones, and you can choose which one you'd like for that. And let's see who, I'm going to do number 6. Jennifer Garrett, I'm going to send that on to you. I'll get in touch with you and we can decide which ones you'd like to have. So wrapping that up, lastly, thank you all for coming. We so appreciate it. Again, like Diane said, we apologize for the audio difficulties that we had today. And we are going to do a July gsLive on July 29th at 6 p.m. because that seems to be the best time. And hopefully we can get all this technology stuff worked out and have another good program for you. So thank you all for coming. And it says, I will make some, I've got a comment. Thank you. I will have my daughter make some masks for us. So that's very nice of you. Thank you. That's from Stacy. All right. I'm sorry if we botched this up more than we care to think of, but have a good evening, everybody.